Good afternoon, I'm Maciej, Mikos, and you're watching World Talks. US sanctions on Russia's two biggest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, made the latter plan to sell its international assets. What consequences may it have for our region of Europe? We'll talk about it with Sławomir Raszewski, senior oil and gas lecturer at the University of London. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So, first of all, because this is shocking news to some, is Vladimir Putin really selling the assets which help him weaponize energy in Europe?
I mean, the information is obviously all over the place, and then I have to say that it's difficult to kind of get a sense of what's happening because there's so much information out there. But what we definitely know is that the sanctions are having some impact on the way oil and gas is managed, particularly those assets that are outside of Russia. But we also have to remember that there is a context here. I mean, obviously, there's an economic and geopolitical context why US is now stepping in to sanction Russia's two largest oil companies.
Now, this is because of Europe, but what it mean because of Ukraine? Pardon me. But what it mean for the Burgas refinery in Bulgaria, the biggest such site in the Balkans, to be released from the Russian grip? What would it mean for the whole region?
Well, that's a very good question, and as we know, the sanctions have been announced, but they haven't yet taken the effect. Our understanding is that the sanctions will take effect in November, so there's still some time in between. But what we know is that with sanctions, the economic sanctions, the key is implementation of the sanctions. So in other words, can these sanctions be actually deployed, delivered in real life? And in the past, what we have seen is that, unfortunately, there's been too much of, if you like, sanctions. So yes, sanctions have been announced, but on the other hand, the oil was still flowing by third parties, and there's probably the proof is in the pudding, and we'll find out whether third parties in particular are going to swerve, particularly when it comes to India as the third party that has helped, in a sense, European partners to circumvent the sanctions. So we shall see what happens with those major third-party suppliers and whether they implement the sanctions in the next few weeks. There is also a very interesting thing here, because on the one hand, these sanctions are required in order to affect revenues, oil revenues, based on which obviously the state budget functions. But on the other hand, there's also importance of energy security. So we want to continue to be secure. So I think that this is a very interesting phenomenon. And it also, if you like, there's a search for a balancing act here. On the one hand, to deliver sanctions, but on the other hand, to affect energy security, in this particular case, of European countries.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, the same thing is apparently happening will apparently happen in Romania with its Petrotel oil refinery. But what would be the short-term consequences, economic short-term consequences for the Balkan countries' economy?
Well, in the short-term perspective, again, it depends how sanctions are. But in the short-term perspective, I think that we see lack of options. The refineries are on supplies of specific type of crude. So, of course, this crude has to be found elsewhere. And, of course, the question is, can this crude be found elsewhere? It's possible to start getting supplies from alternative destinations, but then refining capacity sync with the type of crude that is swapped for the Russian crude. So there is a lot of questions here, but I would say we shall see how successful this is going to be, because the concern that has been expressed by some experts so far is that we're probably going to see increase in the transactional cost and perhaps some sort of circumvention of these sanctions.
Well, we have a quote from Vladimir Milov, former advisor to later Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, speaking exactly about the sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil. Let's listen then.
Well, Rosneft and Lukoil are two biggest oil-producing companies in Russia, number one and number two. They're not very much different. I mean, in terms of ownership, true Lukoil is nominally privately owned, but all the big business in Russia is tightly controlled by the Putin government, so it really makes no big difference. Obviously, these companies are trying to move to sell their foreign assets and to reconsider some of their long-term and short-term oil supply contracts. I believe personally that Rosneft and Lukoil had been developing contingency plans for the case of being sanctioned by United States or European countries. So they do have something in mind how to switch to indirect sales of oil through shady traders, shell companies using Russia's shadow fleet. So here, these sanctions are best being supplemented with thorough enforcement on part of the United States and European countries. Without it, Russians and Rosneft and Lukoil will find ways to operate clandestinely.
So I guess you agree with Vladimir Milov that both Russian energy giants plan to act in the shadows, that this is just what we see on the first side, but it's not truly what's happening with Vladimir Putin's weapons of energy, I shall say.
Well, unfortunately, it's very difficult to implement sanctions. And, when you look at the grand scheme of things, the world daily consumption of oil is over 100 barrels a day. The world, see Rosneft and Lukoil combined only have a small fraction of production, 5%, slightly over 5 million barrels of oil per day they produce globally. Globally speaking, they're not that important. Obviously, when you look at this particular, they are quite important. In other words, there are limited options refiners have when it comes to swapping for something else. And on the other hand, as I mentioned, it is in the vital interest, even though Rosneft and Lukoil are not the biggest giants in the world. In fact, your production is currently 20 million barrels per day. Saudi Arabia is 11 million barrels of oil per day. So these two companies produce only 5.3 only. It's also substantial. They export 3.5 million barrels of oil per day. It is important for them to continue selling, but in the grand scheme of things, obviously, it's from the global perspective, it may have impact, but it's not going to be a major impact, if you like. But what is important here is that we probably going to see a sort of to find a way to the markets, and we have seen this. And by the way, there are companies that specialize in, if you like, oil supply surveillance, and we've seen how successful companies have been, or traders have been, to ship oil in open oceans, for instance. So oil might be leaving, but it actually arrives in the port. Perfectly legitimate supply. So I think the question is, to what extent those that put those sanctions are willing to go extra mile to really enforce them. So enforce is key here. And I would also say that a lot also depend on the countries. Oil will probably still going to flow to India. Indian refiners have said that there will be some statements that they're not planning to buy any new oil. They're not contracting for any new oil supplies, but it means that the existing contracts are still in place. Chinese refiners have said that they are going to increase imports from Russia. I mean, let's not forget, if there are sanctions in place, this is a unity for those who want to still play the game. They still want to buy the oil. They are probably going to get discounts. So I think there will be incentives for buyers to continue buying oil. Now, in the long-term perspective, this is a bit risky, because obviously this means that the companies in Russia will be getting less for their oil. And at the moment, we already have seen and heard that the discounts are taking place and to incentivize buyers. So of course, the question is for how long these sanctions are going to be in place, and I would say probably mostly depends on the largest buyers and what do they do with this oil. Let's not say India only 8 years ago virtually imported no oil from Russia. Today it's over 4.5 million barrels of oil per day. So we see how India has managed to increase virtually from nothing to a major importer of Russian oil. So probably we have to look at what's the said countries. If there is increases of import from this oil is finding way to Central and Eastern Europe.
So as always, we'll have to wait and see what the remainder of the year brings us in this regard. Sławomir Raszewski, Senior Oil and Gas Lecturer at the University of London, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more interviews here on TVP World.